In this video, we're going to document the rebuilding of our water pump that we pulled from our John Deere 430 two-cylinder tractor. This water pump would be the same style used on a 420, 430, or 440 from the Dubuque tractor series of 1956-57 through roughly 1960. Essentially, all we need to do is drop a little money on it for some new seals and gaskets, and we're going to hit it with a little elbow grease, liberal coating of that. Bet you didn't know it came in an aerosol. And after that, an undetermined amount of time later, we should have a rebuilt water pump. That is the quick and simple version. If you're content with that, stop the video now. If you'd like to see what we did to get in the inside and pull everything apart, keep watching, because all those details are what's coming up next. Our water pump off the block, we can go ahead and take apart the return line, these two screws there and there, and then we'll start with removing this back cover with some Phillips head screws. That'll give us a view of our impeller and all the other fun things inside. We can also go ahead and pull our generator bracket off of here at the same time. We've taken a field trip over to the vise, locked our water pump in place to give us a little something to turn our screws against instead of having it flopping all around. I removed the cast return pipe that was mounted here with the two Allen head screws. Came off fairly easy. These big screws, I mean, you may get them out easy. I'll give them a little tap with the hammer, and I mean, you can try the screwdriver approach. I tend to get a little Phillips head bit that has a angle to the back end, and I'll use my socket wrench to give me a little more torque and turning, because they can be in there kind of snug sometimes. So let's see what we get. We'll get this screw out. We'll pop our back cover off. We'll see how corroded it is. See what our impeller looks like that's waiting underneath here. Don't want you to miss the moment of truth. Oh, not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'll throw that in the blast cabinet. It'll clean up well enough. Got our impeller, the shaft that the impeller rides on. One of the next things we have to do is remove our pulley from the opposite side. There is a clip on the inside underneath that pulley that holds the whole shaft in place So we'll do some digging to see what we can do to get that pulley off the front. To remove the pulley from the shaft on the water pump, I'm going to use a standard gear puller. What's going to happen is the hooks of the gear puller are going to pull against the pulley and push against the shaft on the inside and pull it up. The push point of the puller is too big for the opening. It's there, so I'm going to take this little 5/16 bolt. Got the little nut on the end to kind of give it a little bit of a dish. We'll drop that in there as a push point and see if we can't coax this guy to come off. Patience and persistence. What I'll do, once I get this to the point where that nut is not enough height, I'm going to back this off. I think that's about where we're at. Back this guy off. And make sure you can see what I'm doing here. We are going to stack another nut up inside there. Now, put him on there. Still not perfect. I'm sure there's a better way. You get that two-jaw puller that sits right down in there against that shaft. You might be far and away better off, but sometimes you gotta work with what you got. That's what we're doing today. Sometimes magic happens. Sometimes it's frustration and disappointment. We're starting to run out of clearance with all our nuts, so we swapped the nuts out for a small 3/8 socket extension, which is going to act again as a point to push on. And I think we're actually getting somewhere. Oh yeah. All that effort just to get our pulley off of that little shaft. Pulley, shaft, you can see how far up we had to pull them off of there. You can also depending on how the lighting is, see this little clip. This clip right here is going to be what holds our, probably can't see, I'm up too close. That clip is what holds our like our bearing unit in the water pump housing. So we'll see what we can do to tease him out of there. These sometimes really get stuck in there. Well, something's giving a little bit. There we are. As you can see, I might be able to salvage that. It's just a little bend in there. Probably what it should look like. So that should give us the ability to tap our shaft unit free of our housing. Now, we are set up in my little shop press, and our goal today is to use hydraulic power to push down on this bolt, push it down through the impeller and out of the water pump housing. I had to make a little modification to my press. I don't know if it's going to work. My Amish neighbor borrowed my bottle jack, has yet to bring it back. Got to keep an eye on those Amish. They can be sneaky that way. But we're going to give it a shot, see what happens. I'm going to stand back way out of the way. One of the things you got to keep track of is that this bolt doesn't start to get a lean or a tilt to it. We want to make sure everything's vertical. Putting the pressure down, if we start seeing some tilting or leaning, there's a good chance this could pop out and be a projectile, which, safety first. That's a good pop. There we go. Water power did the job. Little creativity helping us make some progress. I think that's freed up enough to, we can take out our impeller. That part's free. We still have to finish pushing the shaft the rest of the way out of the housing there. For that, I may be able to use this longer bolt. Perfect. Just like the script was written. We got our shaft assembly out here. We have our water pump seal. We're going to pull that out and replace it. I've got a new bearing and shaft assembly to use here. One thing we got to keep track of is this little ring on the end. I believe that's called a slinger. I'm not sure if I have to reuse that one or if it comes on the new bearing assembly. We shall see. But before we get into doing our cleaning, we'll go ahead and pop that seal out of the front of this housing here, and that's just a simple process of taking a punch, putting it in there, popping them out. Our water pump parts are clean, prepped, ready for reassembly. You'll notice that things have multiplied. I have a working tractor that's got a leaky water pump, so I thought now's the perfect time to pull one out of storage, tear it apart, do a rebuild on it as well. You'll notice there's some color sprayed to certain areas. These are spots that I won't be able to hit with the spray gun later once everything's back together. Kind of help with the corrosion process, at least avoiding it. I did go ahead and target some of the insides as well, for better or for worse. They'll probably just flake off once coolant's flowing through there, but thought I'd try at least minimize the rustiness that may occur on the inside. I do have a new bearing and shaft assembly, a new seal, a new gasket. These were all available through John Deere. I'll need to order a second set for the second pump because it was an afterthought, but we'll get there. So with that, we'll start putting some stuff back together. We're going to move over to the press. We're going to start with maybe putting our seal in and take it from there. Here at the press, we want to push in our new water pump seal into this little recess inside the pump housing. To do that, the manual says we should get a tubular driver that only contacts this outside metal edge. I don't have any fancy tools that might fit that description, so I'm just going to go ahead and use this 1¼ inch socket, which seems like it fits right around there nicely. Line everything up. Put our seal down in there. Our little socket on top, and let's see if we can push him in place. It should go in pretty easy once it's seated. Yeah, it'll level out and we'll start to feel a little bit of resistance just like that. So release pressure. Looks good. Seal installed. I believe the shaft is next. Before I install my new shaft and bearing in the water pump housing, I need to put this little part they call a slinger on the end here. I pulled it from this original shaft and bearing, drew a little line where the edge was before I removed it. And I've also got this other shaft and bearing that's got a slinger still affixed to it. The manual says about 1.5 inches from that lip to the end of the shaft. We can always measure that once we get it started. Do that. Gonna set it up on the vise here. Shouldn't take too much to get this on there. I think I can. There we go. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing that it's loose. It took a little more convincing than that to get it off the other original, but there was a pretty good amount of corrosion in there. Zero our caliper. You can see this isn't the most precise way of measuring it, but I think we're getting a pretty good idea. We're right about there. So we'll take that 1.5 inches. We are now going to press our shaft and bearing into our housing. So we'll put our little fancy driver there. Shouldn't be too much resistance to this one. It should, yeah, slide down in pretty easy. Especially when it's straight. Like with the seal, we should get some resistance once we're seated, but the other thing we can watch for is our groove That's going to line up with that opening in the housing where our clip's going to rest, and I think we're getting pretty close there. Grab the light up above here and take a look in there. Yeah, you can see the groove centered right there. So we will get our little clip. I don't know if this is a good idea or bad idea. I'm going to try putting a little bit of never sees on the end of that. As hard as those come out sometimes. The clip goes in a way where this little part here will fit in this notch, and I don't know how, there we go, just like that. That's going to hold our shaft and bearing in place in our housing. Next we are going to press our impeller onto the shaft here. Before getting too far with that, it's worth noting in the service manual that there are some clearances we have to pay attention to. 0.037 to 0.057 inch between the impeller blades and the inside of the pump. So what I've done is got my little feeler gauges, and I'm going to set it up to 0.047 right in between. Use that as a guide to make sure we're not too deep. Pushing the impeller in place requires a little balance because we are actually pushing against the shaft. I have this set up with our 1 1/4 socket pushing down on the impeller. We're going to drive it down a little bit and then check our clearances in there once we feel like we're getting close to our target. Too far and the blades of the impeller will rub against the housing on the inside. Not far enough, and we'll rub against the plate on the back side. I think we're okay there. That's at 0.47. There's probably an easier spot to check it right in there. So I'm not quite getting in there yet. So it's a little tighter. Let's do 0.34. Plenty of there. So I know I'm probably not to my 0.37 yet. I'm going to, at this stage, back my press off, see how my plate fits on the back, just to make sure we've got enough clearance, because we might be in position right there. After a little behind the scenes testing and fitting, I've got our gauge 0.18 and 0.020, so essentially 0.038. Just a little bit above, and it's a snug 0.038 that fits in there. So we will call that good in terms of placement. The back of the impeller is fairly close to the plate, but we have to remember the gasket is going to sit in there too, and that's going to buy us a little bit of space as well. So happy with that. Before we can put our rear plate and gasket on, we need to install our main pulley, because we have to use the shaft again as a push point when we press our pulley onto the pump. So we'll get that set up on the vise next. Before we press the pulley on the shaft, there's an important dimension to pay attention to. This basically a little bit over 1 inch that we want in this space that's down in this hole. And to accomplish that, I'm putting my pulley in place, and I've got this bolt and nut combo that's at 1.1 inches, sort of right in between the clearance mark. And we're going to drop that right in there, and then when we push down with a flat press across the top, once it hits that that screw, that nut, it'll be at the point where the fan belts and alternator belts will all line up. So with that, press her on. Because we are once again putting pressure down on the shaft with this pulley, pushing it in place, we need to use the bottom of the shaft as a push point. I have taped a nut on the bottom there so we are not pushing against the impeller when we're over on the press. The tape simply holds the nut in place because it's kind of hard to line up when you're trying to get it all sitting on the press just right. Pushing our pulley in place, we know our housing's free because it can still turn and we're up off the ground there, so. And once we hit that little bolt and nut combo, it should stop our progress. We should feel it. Offer some resistance, which I think that's where we've come. Flush right at the top, just like we planned. With our pulley in place, we can put our new gasket on our back plate. It's kind of an optical illusion. You think the hole would line up with the water port hole. That, if you have one rebuilt water pump. That concludes the rebuild of this water pump used in a John Deere Model 420 or 430 tractor with a 2-cylinder engine. Now that that is done, we can swing back over to the engine and decide what part to take off and refurbish next. Stay tuned for that.